often by giving you a specific source. This comes from Defoe, this comes from Lloyd's, and it's only or this is the New York Times. The institution itself claims authority for itself, and it claims to be complete to give you all the news. The news itself being a complicated notion. News being events of what? What is it? And we'll talk about this later. What is it that makes today? Apple's going to allow independent audits of its factories in China. Israel claims that Iran is behind the bombs in India and the state of Georgia. What the Republicans are doing about the payroll cut. A model who became famous on YouTube. The Westminster Dog Show. Soviet television. California's congressional delegation is changing. What makes these events worthy? So important that I have to know about them every morning over my coffee. And if I don't, I get nervous. Print in particular is playing a political role in this period. As I said, these broadsides and newspapers are used to rouse popular sentiment in times of crisis. 1681, the exclusion crisis, a question of whether Charles II's brother, who becomes James II, is the Duke, the Earl of York, at that time, is actually a convert. He's converted back to Catholicism, if memory serves. And the Parliament does not want a Catholic on the assumption, not unreasonable, that looking across the Channel of France, that it will lead to absolutism, and tries to exclude him. Charles II has no legitimate heirs, but they want to make the king one of his illegitimate heirs. It goes back and forth. At one point, there's a procession in London where they carry effigies of the Pope and cardinals and so on and so forth and burn them in a big pile. It's reported and recorded and reported in a broadside. The gentleman on the left, Titus Oakes, who was made charges of a popish plot. This was 1670. Something like that. The Catholics were going to take over the country. Got a lot of people in trouble until they decided he was worse than that. He was just making it up, and he was put to stop. But all of these stories widely circulated because of the news, and with an authority, an apparent authority that word of mouth might not have had. In other places like France, the libelle that Darton talks about played an important role. Libelle from the Latin for small book, but scabrous or defamatory publications published either abroad, often in Holland, or pretending to be published abroad, published in France, but with Holland on the title page, recounting these stories about Marie Antoinette and her lesbian lovers and so on and so forth, and all of these. Group sex in the Tuileries. Libelle gives us what English word? Like, yeah, it's a small book originally. It's also, and equally importantly, the age of authors, Johnson calls it. Samuel Johnson, something we'll be talking about again next time and several times after then. English writer, essayist, important literary figure, and for our purposes, the compiler of the first authoritative English dictionary in 1755. The present age may be styled the age of authors. There was never a time when men of all degrees of ability, of every kind of education, every profession, employment, were posting with ardor so gentle to the press. Anybody could get a book published. So, well, by our standards, that's nothing. Anybody can post a blog or tweet and let you know what you have for breakfast. But that same feeling is current in this period when books are being turned out in enormous numbers and published written by people who might not have written books at an earlier age. One reason for that is that the source of an author's income is no longer necessarily the patronage of a great man. You can write a sensational book, the booksellers will publish it, and there are enough readers out there who will pay for it to be able to sustain yourself in that way. Oliver Goldsmith writes of that fatal revolution whereby writing is converted to a mechanic trade. That's like a plumber or a carpenter. And booksellers, instead of the great, the aristocrats or wealthy people who could subsidize writers, become the patrons and paymasters of men of genius. Can anything more cramp and depress true genius than to write under the direction of one whose learning does not extend beyond the multiplication tables? Here I am, a great writer, and I have to work for this merchant who barely, all he knows is how to do is add his accounts, and so on. On the other hand, Goldsmith adds that this passage is widely quoted, this one less so. On the other hand, if I were to buy a hat, I would rather have it from a hatter than a stocking maker. It's just so with regard to wit, to learning, and intellectual activity. There should be professionals who do this. That is, say, professional writers. And the professional writer, in that sense, is a creation of this period, along with that, the modern conception of intellectual property, which we will hear about at that interesting length. A famous, important moment, at least symbolically, in this shift. In 1754, Samuel Johnson has been working since 1748 to make the English dictionary. He's done it with an advance from a conjury, that's a conjure, that's to say an association of publishers have given him 2,000 guineas to write the book. He's got his assistants, he's writing it, and so on and so forth. And Lord Chesterfield, who's who's a patron to many writers and fancies himself a literary figure of his own, whose letters to his son are still written. They teach, someone said, Johnson said this, they teach the morals of the manners of a dancing master and the morals of a whore, was what Johnson said. Chesterfield has not offered to subsidize the dictionary, but just before the dictionary is about to appear, when it's clear it's going to come out, it's going to be a big deal, and we'll talk about that next time. He writes an essay. He says, "Good order and authority in the language are now necessary. We must have recourse to the old Roman expedient in times of confusion and choose a dictator. I give my vote to Mr. Johnson to fill that post, and I hereby declare that I make a total surrender of my rights and privileges of the English language as a freeborn British subject to the said Mr. Johnson." That's a picture on the left of Johnson sitting in Chesterfield's waiting room, waiting to see him. Chesterfield, I don't know if he wouldn't see him, wait a long time, along with various ne'er-do-wells and fops and so forth. Paul and I have a version of that engraving on the wall of our office. Johnson writes back in what was, some people have said, the Magna Carta of the modern author to Chesterfield. 7 years, my lord, have passed since I waited in your outward rooms, during which time I have it at last at the verge of publication without one act of assistance, one word of encouragement, one smile of favor, much less without one penny of help. He is not a patron, my lord, one who looks with unconcern on a man struggling for life in the water, and when he has reached ground, encumbers him with help. The point here is that we don't need you. I don't need your stinking pounds. I can sell this book on the open market. The only people who still write books under the aegis of official patronage are who? Who churn out books that do not pay their salaries? Yeah, university professors, right? Everybody here, publish or perish, but it's not as if you're going to make the money, your salary from publishing. It's you're going to publish, the university will continue to hire you and so on. So a survival of the Renaissance patronage system. But in the rest of the market, you write a book and you're Chelsea Handler, you write a book, it sells a lot of copies, and that's how you make your money. Stephen King. So by this time, writing is an important source of income for writers, and intellectual property and so on. Paul will talk about this. Are going to emerge in consequence of that. In the course of all these developments, there emerges in Great Britain and in different degrees and manners in France and Germany and other Western European countries, this body called the public. Blanning, whom I quoted at the beginning, the Cambridge historian, writes that in the late 17th century, a new cultural space developed, a public sphere. How many people have heard that phrase? Just hands quickly. Yeah, public sphere is this, but it really should be public sphere as opposed to private sphere. It's a word, and Jürgen Habermas uses the word to talk about the publicness. The idea of a public, a domain in which people exchange ideas, criticism, information, and create. Blanning calls it a public actor, a cultural actor. The public as a source of opinions and so forth that the rulers of nations will have to consult in justifying their decisions. Malherbe, the French political figure, around the same time writes that a tribunal has arisen independent of all powers and that all powers respect, that appreciates all talents, that pronounces all people of merit, and in an enlightened century, and this is the moment of the Enlightenment, men of letters are, amid the public dispersed where the orators of Rome and Athens were in the middle of the public assembly. There's this new power that's arisen out of this group of people, not respectful of merit and birth, but merely of intelligence and ability to express themselves. That's becoming a cultural and political actor. It's an interesting word, public. You look at the dictionaries, and I speak as sometimes lexicographer. We don't do very well with this word. The American Heritage Dictionary I'm associated with says the community or the people as a whole. It's not clear what's the people if not the people as a whole. The American people want that you're talking about the American people as a whole. Or a group of people sharing a common interest, the reading public. And the Oxford English Dictionary, the community is an aggregate, pretty much the same thing. But when you look at the way the word's used, we use it in a much more specific sense than that. If you look for the phrases the American public and the American people, you find the American people about 4 times as often as the American public. But the American public is quite frequent. Now stick an Egyptian in place of American. People almost never refer to the Egyptian public. There's an Egyptian people, you can consider them as a whole, but they're not a public. A rocky public, you're not going to see. What do you think the difference is? We talk about the 19th century public. We don't talk about the medieval public. What's the difference? Yeah.
I think it's kind of like going along the line of how notion that public is just like that body of people that have something
That's true. And there is that. And what crucially feeds that discussion? How does that discussion take place? Where does it take place? It takes place where else? I mean, what's the source of information and regimenting of public opinion? In Habermas's in 17th, 18th century England or in the modern United States, but less so in modern Egypt. Yeah. Communication, and in particular, what kind of communication? Medium of communication. What medium? In the 18th century, what are we talking about? Well, the salon is certainly important, but what else? Writing, and what kind of writing? Letters? The press, newspapers, the media. The sense is that in the United States, the media play a crucial role in shaping public opinion or reflecting public opinion and so on. In Egypt, at least as we perceive it, that's not the case. That's why there's a 19th century public, but we're less comfortable talking about a medieval public. There are medieval people, but there's not a public because there isn't that notion of the press as the shaper of these collective attitudes. The idea of the public sphere is one in which, as I was saying, rank and privilege are set aside. Everybody, now this is never quite realized, but everybody talks and is listened to according to how well they speak and how cogent their arguments are and so forth. The place in which I see the form that most closely resembles the idealized public sphere in America is sports talk radio. Can I just see hands? Does anybody here listen to KGO sports talk? Nobody listens to Gary Radnich and so on and so forth? No, okay, I don't know. But if you happen to listen to those programs because your radio dial is stuck in your car or something like that, what you hear is people calling up and it says this is Sparky from Novato. He's 17 years old. And he says I really don't think the Giants should keep Hoffett first because he's not going to hit well this year and so on. And Radnich or whoever's the host will evaluate his arguments and they'll have a discussion and Radnich will figure out how well informed he is and how well he argues. And you can be a university professor from Berkeley and if you don't really know what you're talking about, they're not going to give you the time of day. There's a sense of a democratic discourse in which a 16-year-old from Novato and a professor from Berkeley count the same. It's really how much you know about the Giants and how good are your arguments and so forth. That's the model for the larger discourse that's supposed to dominate the public sphere. Crucially, in the public sphere, something called public opinion is going to emerge. What it is and how we measure it is harder to say. Nowadays, we say, well, there are polls that measure public opinion, but we know there are problems with polls, and polls don't tell us everything about public opinion, and the media are supposed to report to us what's going on in public opinion, but they obviously shape public opinion. It's a very problematic notion. Nonetheless, when, for example, it turns out that the administration's policy on the health assurance requirements to provide contraception turn out to be apparently unpopular with large numbers of people, somehow the administration knows about that and backpedals because public opinion doesn't like it. Charles James Fox, British Prime Minister, 1792, it is certainly right and prudent to consult the public opinion. If the public opinion did not happen to swear with mine, if after pointing out to them the danger, they did not see it in the same light as me, or if they conceive that another remedy was preferable to mine, I should consider it my due to my king, due to my country, to my honor, to retire. That is, if I cannot persuade the public to support the policies that I'm pressing for, I must retire. But one thing is clear, that I ought to give the public the means of forming an opinion. So the public, given the means of forming an opinion, news, will create an opinion that will somehow percolate back up to figures in power, and that will be the means whereby the basis on which legitimate authority rests. Whether in democracies or even in nations that are not democratic, there's always an appeal to the public and public opinion. Finally, I should start with this. No, he says, with the emergence of the public comes the emergence of the modern sense of the nation, of the nation as what the political scientist Benedict Anderson calls an imagined community. Why is it an imagined community? Well, there are people in Georgia and Texas and Alaska and so on with whom I share a sense of community, but I'll never meet these people. I don't know them. Maybe I'll run into them in an airport or at McDonald's somewhere, but I don't know these people. I know that we're thinking about the same things and talking about the same things because we're reading the same newspapers. Because in those days, I actually would go and see on the walls the newspaper published, and I realized the same newspaper was being read in other parts of the nation, or we're all watching the same TV shows or logging into more or less the same websites, or at least websites that are repeating the same news. So I know that there's a common experience. And in virtue of that common experience, I can assume a common point of view that's a basis for public opinion. Next time, we'll do the dictionary and the encyclopedia, and see you then.